So gamification is a big topic. We don't have a ton of time, but I'm going to try my best to make this as useful as possible in the time we do have together. So first, a little bit about me. Hi, I'm Andy. I look after community at Glide. We're a no-code development platform for business apps. Basically means you can go and build software without writing any code. I've been here for about a year. Prior to Glide, I was the head of global community operations at GoDaddy for 7-ish years, looking after the blog, community, and events. So for me, gamification has long come from the perspective of brand. So how do we apply gamification principles to brands? Now, before I get into gamification specifically, though, what I want to talk about is how I define community. So depending on who you ask in the community space, which community professional you're talking to, everyone has their own definition of what community is. Now, for me, it's a very simple definition. A community is a connected group of people with something in common. Now, the theme for this session is in the context of brand communities. So this connected group of people most likely going to be your customers, but the definition applies much more broadly than that. And the thing that they have in common is that they are using your product or service. So that's how I define community. Now for gamification, well, the first thing I want to say is that gamification is near and dear to my heart because gaming is how I got started in online community, going way back to the late 90s, early 2000s, playing games like Quake, Grand Theft Auto, World of Warcraft. Like so many others in the community space, I have my roots in community thanks to online games. And so when I think about gamification, I have a really big kind of gamer slant on it, because to me, if you really want to borrow from the world of gaming and apply gaming principles to the work that you're doing in community, let's actually borrow from the world of gaming and see what we can learn from successful game franchises. So I looked up the definition of gamification for kicks when I was starting to prepare this deck. And the Oxford Dictionary definition of gamification was this: the application of typical elements of game playing, so point scoring, competition with others, rules of play, to other areas of activity, typically as an online marketing technique to encourage engagement with a product or service. That's the dictionary definition. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it's kind of boring. I think that gamification is much more about, gamification is much more about this. One sec. This. You hit the wrong key on the keyboard and you stop clicking the mouse. There we go. Gamification is about combining intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. That's really what gamification is at its core. Now, if you're not familiar with the terms intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, this is what it means. Intrinsic motivation are things that motivate people just based on the task. It's something that you don't need a carrot on a stick for. It's just something that you want to do inherently. And when we think about community participation in general, a lot of the motivation for participating in a community comes from intrinsic motivation, that you're getting a sense of fulfillment and enjoyment from asking questions, answering questions. The participation in the community is the reward itself. On the extrinsic side, we're talking about external factors, things that come from the outside to motivate you. Promotions, pay raises, bonuses, benefits, prizes, winning perks, all of those things, the carrot on a stick. And what gamification does really well is that it brings these two sides together, because a great game will both be fulfilling on its own by how it's designed. You enjoy playing the game and going through the motions of playing it, but there's also the things that are dangled in front of you, whether it be high scores or additional perks and rewards. So let's look at what we can take from game design to apply to our community programs. Now, if you look up game design principles and what it takes to create a great game, there are tons of different lists and resources for all the different factors that go into it, because creating an effective game is a really complicated task. But if you were to boil it down to a handful of core concepts, this, in my opinion, these are the three things that really go into what you need to borrow from game design. First is clear goals. So what am I doing as a participant, as a member, as a player? What am I doing and why? What am I working towards? Second is the rules and mechanics. How do I participate? And third is progression. So that question of, are you winning yet? You know whether or not you're going in the right direction. So let's talk about these each in a bit more detail. So for clear goals, every good game needs a focal point. There needs to be an objective, something that players are working towards. And the same applies to how we take gamification and bring it into our communities. A member of your community needs to know what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, and what they get for achieving that goal. Fairly simple concept, right? It could be, for inspiration from the world of gaming, skee ball. You're trying to get the ball into the middle because that's where the goals are. And if you can get into the smallest hole up at the top, you get the most points. If you're playing chess, it's a very clear objective. You're trying to beat your opponent. And if you're playing World of Warcraft, you're trying to take down the raid boss. These are all very clear objectives, the focal point that you are working towards in each case. Now, the second piece, the rules and mechanics. So every game has instructions and pieces, parts to keep players on the rails. For talking about playing chess, you have all your pieces, you have the chessboard, everything happens within that context. So as a player or as a member of your community, when you're thinking about gamification, it's what's the expectation? What is expected of me? What do I need to do to achieve that goal? How do I work towards that? What are the actions that I can take? How do I take those actions? What are you asking me to do? And equally as important, what am I not allowed to do? So we start setting out the rules for what members can do. And as I mentioned, progression, how do we know that we're making progress towards that objective? So every game has some way of tracking scores, showing players how far they've come and how far they have left to go. In bowling, the good old leaderboard up top above your lane, showing the scores, showing how much is left to go in your game. The high scores in pinball, showing what's achievable in terms of points. And then I think a really great example of gamification, gaming principles, Call of Duty Warzone in this case. They have a very clear path for how players can earn points and what they get in return for earning those points as they level up, earn ranks, unlock rewards, and we'll get back to that in a little bit. But the point there is that there is some way of knowing as a player, as a member, that I am progressing towards a defined objective. So putting these things together, these are great abstract concepts. So how do we take these and apply them to community? Well, here's a really simple example and something that we started doing at Glide over the summer. So we didn't really have a gamification approach for the Glide community. It was very much intrinsic motivation. And it worked really, really well. We have an amazing response rate in the Glide community. We have a very active group of contributors who do a lot of the heavy lifting in responding to questions and driving engagement. But we hadn't really done anything in terms of gamification. So what we started trying was community challenges, and we started rolling these out in the spring. And all we did was fill in the blanks for each one of these principles. So for the goal and reward, as we define a new challenge, we ask, what is it that we want our members to do? What is the thing that we're trying to achieve here? And it could be something that is super specific to the community. It could be something that has the community contributing to something else. So one of the things that we did early on was invite people to go and build apps with Glide and show them off on social media. And then we picked some winners from that. And then after that, we did a G2 review-a-thon, where we invited people to go and write reviews on G2 for our platform. And then winners were chosen at random from the community for participating in that. So we were doing these things that support other parts of the organization, other parts of Glide, through these gamification tactics, these community challenges. So we have the goal and reward. What do we want them to do? What will they get? The rules and mechanics. How will they participate? What's the deadline going to be? What's the success criteria? We figure that all out as we're defining our challenges. And then progression. We figure out how are we going to track the participation. So for the G2 reviews, fairly simple. We had a spreadsheet. We cataloged the reviews that came in and mapped them against community members. Same thing for community challenges that take place on social media. We track them back to who's this person on social, what's their community handle, and we distribute rewards based on that and track participation based on that. So taking these three prompts, we just started riffing on what are other things that we can do. And so we continued doing these challenges through the summer, and now we're starting to think about what are we going to do in Q4. And so it's a really simple recipe for applying gamification principles to your community. I'll show you more on that in a moment. So gamification in action. If we take these three principles, the goal and reward, rules and mechanics, and a way of tracking progression, what are some other examples of that in action? I think a really big one that comes up a lot when you're talking about examples of effective, thriving communities is Salesforce. So Salesforce Trailblazers is kind of this all-encompassing program for Salesforce users to complete courses and quests for credentials and prizes. So that's the reward. That's the goal that they're sending out there. As a Salesforce user and a member of the Trailblazer community, I want to get credentialization that'll help me stand out as a Salesforce user or expert, and certification that shows that I meet a certain set of criteria. So these things are really good for me in terms of professional development as a Salesforce user. In terms of the rules and mechanics, how are these things handled? They have their Trailhead LMS that handles all of this. And then for progression, the points and badges that Trailhead users, the Trailblazers, that they accumulate, that's all shown on their Trailblazer profile. So then they end up with a single community profile that is almost like a scorecard for them, in addition to being like their central identity within the Trailblazer community. So one little insight here is that when we're talking about brand communities, especially when we're talking about brand communities for a SaaS product, a technology product, education and community go hand in hand. One of the, in my opinion, one of the low-hanging fruits for gamification is product education. If you can help people get really, really proficient with your platform, with your product, and at the same time recognize and reward them for those milestones that they hit and showcase those milestones, that is much more effective than it just existing in a vacuum. A lot of LMS platforms will allow you to do badging and recognition, but it's when you take that badging and recognition and put it in the context of a community that it really starts to shine, because it's no longer in that silo. It is now part of that community experience. Now, speaking of community experience, Nike on the B2C side, here's a consumer brand that sells merchandise. Now, what they've done over the years, I think, is a really great example of how they can tap into both an existing community, so in this case, running and fitness, and bring in their loyalty program as part of that. So they have Nike Membership, which is their loyalty program, Nike Training Club for fitness and weight training, and Nike Run Club. Now, as a member of this Nike community, you're going to get access to products, content, events, things that are exclusive to their members. And the gamification isn't necessarily a challenge. It's not quite like the go and do this quest or complete this course. It's, are you showing up? Are you training? Are you showing up and participating? And they have separate dedicated mobile apps for each of these groups within the broader Nike community. So whether it's training club or run club, you're still part of that broader Nike community, and you have your profiles within each of these apps for tracking activity. So between those three things, we're hitting on the principles of game design brought over to a consumer community. Now, I personally feel that loyalty programs are a fantastic source of inspiration for gamification. I go to Starbucks quite a bit, and the Starbucks card and the points you can earn, the stars that can then be applied towards rewards, like that is such a great example of gamification in action. All that it's missing is the community piece. And in general, I think that loyalty programs are 1 degree away from being great community programs if only they would connect members to each other. That seems to be the missing secret sauce for these brands, is that they have all the right pieces of gamification, they have their loyalty programs, but they're not connecting their customers to each other. And I think if they were to do that, it would unlock a world of opportunity. So as you're looking at your own community, steal some inspiration from loyalty programs. Look at how they're applying gamification to the programs and see what you can borrow from there. So another community that comes up a lot, especially lately when we're talking about really effective community programs, is Gong. Now, Gong is a SaaS platform for sales teams. And what I really like about their approach is that they are bringing all of these different programs together under the community banner. So they have this name for their community, the Gong Visioneers. And within that, you have education, you have advocacy, you have all these different pieces. And by participating in these different programs, there's like a gamification element to each. So the Influencer Club, for example, that's their customer advocacy program, right? And so there are challenges and rewards specific to that program, but it still exists within the banner of the Gong community. There's still visioneers who are participating in this. Likewise, I believe Gong is using SkillJar for, I think they call it Gong Academy. Yeah, so Gong Academy runs on SkillJar. It's an LMS. It's a separate platform, but it's still under the banner of community. And I think that that's a really smart way of trying to make things easier for your members, for your customers to find their way around. One thing I found during my time at GoDaddy and talking with other community pros who are working with larger organizations is that it's very easy for all of these pieces to get siloed. And internally, you see the org chart. You see the difference between digital care, education, brand, content marketing, like all these different things are kind of spread out, and it's different teams working on each. What I like about Gong's approach is that they are pulling these things that would typically be different destinations, different parts, and pulling it together under the community. And then for the customer, it's basically one destination. Within the Gong community, there are all these different programs, but it's one shared login for Gong users to get into any of these different parts. They're making the technology stack and the organization less visible to the customer, because for the customer, it's about them being part of the Gong community. Okay, so a lot of stuff there. How do we put it all together? Well, when you look at the topic of gamification for online community, historically, it's been the same thing pretty much for the last 20 plus, 30 plus years. You have points, titles, and badges unique to your community platform, but it's isolated. It's isolated from all the other potential community touch points. So if you think about what community is today versus how we may have defined it in the past, community is not just one place, right? Like when I said my definition of community, it's that connected group of people. And that connected group of people, they're going to be coming together, sure, on your community platform, in your customer forum, but they're also connecting on social media. They're connecting in other groups that you may not be part of. They're connecting in other communities, and and they're connecting offline too at events and meetups and things like that. So you have all of these different community experiences and interactions happening that are all part of community, but gamification is tied historically to one platform. The posts that they're making on a forum, they get points for those posts, and they get titles and badges. It's fine, but it's not encompassing everything that is community. And so if you are tracking activity across some of these other places as well, so let's say you're using, I don't know, Eventbrite for event registration for your community. You have Eventbrite over here, and then you have your forum, and then maybe you're doing stuff on Zoom, like this webinar. These are all different platforms. They're all isolated experiences. And from that, we have this disconnected data. So you have all this data sitting in silos across these platforms. So as I said, it's not a bad thing. It's great to have this recognition within your forum, within your community platform, but it can be so much more than that. So here's an example over here from a few different legacy community platforms, PHPBB, Zenforo, Vanilla, I think Higher Logic up there. We have all of these different platforms all doing things kind of the same way, which is you have your community profile, you got your points, your badges tied to that profile, but they're not reflecting things that are happening elsewhere. And as community professionals, community managers, we can do a lot more. So this is what I propose. That the better way of doing this, of doing gamification, is to broaden our horizons. So recognition should come in different forms. It shouldn't just be tied to a title or a badge in a forum. There are other things that you can do. Track activities across multiple platforms, not just your forum. Go and track what's happening in events, online and offline. Track what's happening in social. Track what's happening in other groups, other communities. Pay attention to where your community actually is and where they're spending their time and the activities that they're participating in, but also look within your own walls. Do you have an LMS? Are you doing customer education through that? Do you have these other touch points within your product even? Are your customers using your product? Do you want to track their usage of the product and influence that through community programs? Recognize all of these different activities that your members are taking part in, and then connect and compile that data. So all of these different things that are happening all over the place, you need to bring that data together to have that definitive record of who our members are, what they're doing, and the impact that they're making, the points that they're accumulating. So going back to Call of Duty, I said I'd bring this up again, so here it is. Call of Duty does a really good job of laying this out for their players, for their community members. So this is for the launch of Warzone 2.0. They lay out very clearly, these are the perks. These are the goals you're working towards, the recognition and rewards that you're going to get. We have the equivalent of badging, titles, virtual rewards in the case of the game, of course. But then how do you earn these points? So that's all very clearly laid out. And I think this is a really good model or framework that you can borrow that lays out how can we think about gamification for our own community. So if you have a brand community, a customer support community, what are the things that people can work towards? Don't make it a black box. Lay it out and say, like, these are the things that you can obtain, because then we're taking that lever of extrinsic motivation and making it obvious. And then within the context of Call of Duty, this is how it actually shows up in the game. You are in there, in the experience. You can see what are the different opportunities available to you, all these different types of missions, your progress for each one of those, and then what's the reward for that. So this is the sort of thing that when we look at what we can apply in our community platforms, again, taking a page from actual game design, how do we make this obvious? How do we show them the things that are attainable? Throwing back a reference here to Salesforce Trailblazers, they do a really good job of that because this is all laid out in their Trailhead platform. and the badging and the recognition shows up in the Trailhead member profiles. So the too long didn't read part of this is borrow from game design and apply it to your own programs. So when I talk about recognition, there's a model that I really like using called SAPS. It stands for stuff, access, power, and status. So the concept here is that when it comes to extrinsic motivation, things that people can attain, at the bottom, you're starting with stuff. This is merchandise. It's things that are like material and immaterial, but it has a tangible value, right? So some of the things that we're using at Glide, gift cards, account credit, so against their Glide accounts, brand merchandise, these things all have value, right? And they have value to people who may not necessarily be active in the community, but it's still something that they could care about. A step beyond that is access. So less broad appeal, but it is still somewhat tangible, right? It's the access to, I think I screwed up my pyramid there. Those should be flipped. Anyway, access to people, places, knowledge, etc. Things that are exclusive. It's the exclusive access. So one step up above stuff. Beyond that, power, additional capabilities, utility within your product or community platform. What are the things that people can do within your product? Things that they could achieve through community participation. You make that a reward. And then status, the most exclusive and hardest to obtain, but it's not that valuable except to people in the community, because it's people in the community who are going to care about exclusivity when it comes to like ranks and titles and things like that, because it is unique to the community experience. It's unique to your community. That those titles and roles and ranks don't really mean anything to anybody outside of your community. Okay, now for tracking activity across platforms, we have the classic stuff that I mentioned, right? You have the discussions in your community, threads started, questions answered, bugs reported, ideas shared. Great. That's the stuff that's pretty turnkey. Pretty much every community platform is going to have some kind of gamification system based on that. We're tracking activities of our members, and those points will be accumulated and shown in their profiles. A step beyond that, start looking at the events that you're hosting. So events hosted or attended by community members, tracking their participation in that, maybe giving them more points, more credit for things that they host and facilitate versus things that they just attend. So, track that. And then product usage, mentioned this as well. What features are they activating? What milestones have they reached? Are they adding new users to the product? These are all things that you can track and things that you can influence through, let's say, community challenges. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to look at how community programs and the usage of gamification in community programs can apply to other parts of the organization and other KPIs, social media challenges help with marketing, top of funnel awareness. You do field marketing activations, doing things in person at trade shows and conferences. That can be lead gen. LMS and certifications, really helping with retention as people build up their knowledge around your product, and it becomes kind of a defensive moat, right? Because people spend so much time investing and learning your product and showing off their certifications and credentialization that helps with retention. And then from there, advocacy programs, the referrals to your product, to your service, and incentivizing that, again, through gamification. Now, Gong does that with their customer advocacy program with their influencer club. That's basically what that is. It's an advocacy program where they're tracking the referrals that come in, you're earning points, getting rewards. It's all part of that experience. But at its core, it's gamification for referrals. And the last but not least, connecting and consolidating data. So if you're a smaller team and you're not doing a ton of stuff, manual tracking could be doable. Start up a spreadsheet, use Excel, use Google Sheets. It's tedious, but if it's a small group, small community, you can keep track. Who's participating in what? Keep a log of that, and then have activities corresponding to certain points that they can earn over time. If you're a slightly larger team, doing this all manually, not that great. So you can start looking at DIY automations, start connecting tools together, use Zapier, Make, you can do it through Glide. You need some tech chops, but you don't need to be a developer to use these tools. And you can start building some pretty sophisticated automations to pull all that data together. And then on the higher end, you have these turnkey solutions. So for example, Common Room, we got a screenshot here of their homepage. Common Room, something that I use at Glide, started using towards the end of my time at GoDaddy. It's going to automatically ingest and track activities across pretty much all of the major channels to generate a score for your members, and they call it impact points. So that's a really easy way to say, okay, well, we're going to go and do a challenge on social, or we're going to go and do a challenge related to events. You have all of these things connected to a platform like Common Room. You can then use that to track and use that for the gamification piece of scorekeeping, basically. So at Glide, this is what we're doing for gamification. We have a very simple progression model laid out where we set out our challenges and we do things in the community that are then tracked through Common Room. So we're tracking everything everywhere. We have Common Room connected to pretty much every single thing that we have out there. And for each member, we have a unified profile. So we can see what are they doing in events, what are they doing on YouTube, what are they doing on social, what are they doing in the forum. We pull that all together. For our most active members, we're opening up this new program called Glide Community Champions, which is basically a small VIP group of people who have to apply, who are then given, again, these gamification opportunities of help us with different tasks. Could be help with contribution to our documentation, could be helping with providing peer support in the community, could be helping producing content, it could be referrals, like could be all these different things. But for every ask, there's some sort of perk or incentive. So we're going heavy on the gamification within this program. And then in terms of the incentives, the actual rewards and perks that go out there, I mentioned the brand merch. We do account credit as well. And what we've started doing recently is making things a little bit faster, more turnkey with Swag Up and Tremendous. So Swag Up, if you're not familiar with it, Swag Up is a way for you to basically drop ship your brand merch. So it could be the equivalent of like a gift box, could be standalone items, but it's all handled and fulfilled through Swag Up. And then Tremendous is similar, but Tremendous is for doing things like gift cards. It could be very broad and do like a Visa gift card, or it could be very specific to a certain vendor, like a certain merchant. So if you just want to send out like Starbucks gift cards, you could do that if you wanted. So altogether, what we're doing is we're creating this progression path for members to go from being active in the community, showing up and participating, layering on the gamification through these community challenges, and tracking members' participation in those challenges through Common Room. The most active of those members, we invite them to the Champions program, where we do some more heavy lifting with them, bigger gamification initiatives, bigger activities. And then we use services like Swag Up and Tremendous for fulfillment on rewards. I know there's a lot there, but that's our current approach. And to wrap this up with Bettermode, how do you pull this all together? Well, one thing I really love about Bettermode is the flexibility. So starting on the simple side, I had mentioned before that pretty much every community platform has some way of handling points and profiles and kind of bringing everything together based on what's happening within that community platform. Bettermode, same deal there, but it's very elegant, very it's very nicely laid out, very clean, very efficient to set those things up and basically track the participation points within your community forum. Something that I think is fairly unique to Bettermode is the concept of spaces, because you have so much control through Bettermode's amazing UI builder. You can set up spaces and grant exclusive access to those spaces as one of those incentives. So let's say if we're earning a certain number of points or participating in certain activities, one of the rewards can be getting access to a space within your community. And that is where you can make things available, whether it be access to the team, access to exclusive content, use spaces for that. Now, something else the Bettermode has that I quite like is the apps and embeds. So these native integrations with Bettermode that you can use to pull in additional features and functionalities connected to your Bettermode instance. So you can start looking at what are the things that we can do in these connected apps, or embedding our Bettermode community within our product, and then driving product actions through the community that happens to be embedded within the product. Like, there's so much that you can do by tapping into these capabilities. And then the Zapier integration with Bettermode, the ability to then really push it and start doing some awesome custom stuff. The ability to recognize things that are happening in other places and reflect that within your Bettermode community, or things that happen within your Bettermode community, then firing off and triggering something, let's say in SwagUp or Tremendous. Anyone else that has a Zapier capability, any of those other platforms, using Zapier to connect your community in Bettermode to that other platform, so much opportunity. One of my core concepts for community operations and community platforms in general is that there's not going to be a single platform that does everything. Bettermode comes pretty darn close, but there's no one platform that does everything. You're going to have to use other tools and services. And so if you can create a stack of community tools and platforms that can pull off the things that you want to do, the more automated you make that, the more efficient you make that, the more it's going to help you scale. And when you're tracking the data and pulling all these things together, that's where you're really hitting that level of sophistication, where a community program goes from being what I call the shed out back to being an integral part of the overall business. And that's really what we're working towards. So the last thing I want to leave you with is this. This is a quote from Ralph Koster, who wrote Theory of Fun for Game Design. He was also the lead designer for Ultima Online. And if you're familiar with gaming, familiar with MMO RPGs, Ultima Online predates World of Warcraft. It was one of the early bastions of online community in gaming. And there's this lovely quote from him. That's what games are in the end. They're teachers. Fun is just another word for learning. Community and education, community helping people succeed, helping your customers succeed, getting them the answers that they need. That is why we're doing all these things. Gamification is just another mechanism to help your members achieve the things that they're setting out to achieve. So when you think about gamification, think about it in that context. We're doing it because we're helping motivate members and helping them go towards a great solution and a great outcome. Whew. All right, I think I made it in time. Thanks, everybody. I know that's a lot. If you have any questions or anything, we'll jump into the Q&A. Otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm going to have a drink.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I really loved, I just have mainly two notes. One is that I love the fact that you brought in this idea of bringing together all these different activities happening outside of your platform as well, your product, your social media, and bringing them all together into the community and using that as a activity scoring mechanism to build your gamification challenges. Second note is that the light you have on your background is just amazing.
Thanks. I forgot I had turned it on, actually.
No, it looks really amazing up there. Okay, so I have while I believe people will be adding their questions, I have some in my notes as well here.
Great.
So one question that came up in our community itself is that how important it is to involve the community members while we are designing the gamification strategies, or should you involve them at all or
not? Both. I think it's important to get them involved, but when you're just getting started, it can be really tough because what you're asking them to do is very ephemeral. They don't really have the context for it. So what we did is we started by looking at what are the simple things that we're trying to do, and we want community members to be involved. And we wrapped those asks in gamification. So they're really tasks we wanted help with. After that, we started looking at what are the other things beyond marketing, beyond community, that involvement from our members would be very valuable. And we're starting to build around that. So now we're looking at education a lot more closely. We're looking at growth, so growth marketing, product activation, retention, usage of the product, and we're thinking about how do we wrap gamification around those things. So instead of it just being go and build an app and demo it related to this new feature we launched, it's here's a milestone in the usage of our product that we know is really important for helping people get over the hump to increase their usage. Let's focus on that, get the community involved in doing things around that, because then that helps us on education. It helps us on activation and retention. And we have the lovely community participation as part of it. And the next step beyond that, so I'm thinking out to early next year, is when we start pulling in our most active community members and we do some of that brainstorming with them of, hey, what else could we do? What would be fun? I think hackathons from like the web development, like software development world, hackathons are a great example of that. Like, what would people love to work on? What sort of activities would they love to do, and build gamification around that. So it's less about the objective of like, we need this for the business, and it ends up being more about what does the community really want, and how do we embrace that and tie gamification to it.
Right. Love the part about hackathon, by the way. And there's one more question as well. So do you see any other upcoming trends around gamifications, or any new tech that is coming up around gamifications?
Well, I think as with everything, there's a lot of appetite for seeing how AI is going to affect things like this. Like, imagine, if you will, the way we lay out challenges and in games, like the way they figure out missions and quests and things like that. There's a team or a person responsible for coming up with those things. AI can really help with that. And so I think one of the things that we start looking at is how granular can we get with gamification? Can we make things more inherent to the product and tie that back into community? I feel like where loyalty programs will get closer and closer to community, and I think gamification will just extend that way as well. And because gamification is so core to how loyalty programs are run today, so I think we're just going to see like this merging of these two worlds.
Right. Okay, so one more question that we have come across quite often is that um, when community managers are designing gamification strategies, sometimes what it does is that it gives them boost, but it's short term. So what are the strategies that can apply to keep that engagement level on a long-term basis rather than short burst of engagement?
I think that it's going to depend. I hate trotting that answer out, but it really will depend. It'll depend on the type of community that you have, your members. I think one of the things that kind of is true for gaming, and I think it's true for community overall as well, is if you're not doing anything new or interesting, it gets real old real fast, and it just becomes the same thing, and people aren't as interested. So I think there needs to be some level of uniqueness, something compelling, and something that isn't just like, hey, we're making the rewards bigger. Like, you have to mix it up, because the sense of fun, the sense of discovery and engagement around an activity still matters a lot for gamification, because it is that mixture of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So you still need to hit it.
And one more question is around how effective is your gamification strategy? So when it comes to reporting and measuring that, I saw that you also mentioned and talked about the impact score. So what are the other ways to measure the tangible benefits that the gamification strategy is bringing in?
So there's two parts of it. There's the quantitative and there's qualitative. On the quantitative side, you can look at who are the members that are participating in these activities, these challenges and what have you. And are we, if it's a big enough cohort, are we seeing an impact on the business? Are they using the product more? Are they using the service more? Looking at those numbers, if it's a smaller group, still looking at the same factors, but you might be going in a little bit deeper. So, for example, if you are looking at a bunch of folks that participated in a challenge, you could drill down into who are these individuals, and you can start tying that to go to market. What accounts are represented by these members? What potential customers do we have associated with these community members who are showing up and participating in these challenges? Common Room is really good for that. There are other tools that do it really well too. Orbit, for example. So you can look at it that way. The other side is more derived from insights. So if you have a challenge on, let's say, going with the demo example, because it's something that we've been doing quite a bit of, you get your customers to go out and build apps. In the case of Glide, go and build apps. What are some of the recurring themes that we're seeing? What are the features that they're using in doing those demos? And then from that, are there potential case studies? Are there conversations that could come out of this? Because when someone shows up and participates in a gamification activity, to me, that's an indicator that they are more willing to do something like participate in a customer interview, do a potential case study. So use these activities, these gamification moments, as a way to identify those leads, right? Like, go back to what community is all about. It's all about the people, it's about the individuals. Identify the people who are showing up and participating in these things and see what you can do with them.
Right, right. Well, I do not have any other questions here. So I believe we can conclude the webinar. Thank you so much, Andy, for sharing so many golden nuggets with us.
Thank you for indulging me. I love talking about this stuff, obviously. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.